Hey everyone, you are back with Both Sides Book Club.
Hi.
Hello again. We are here to chat to you guys about another amazing book, and this time we've got an Australian author who we just love it when we do get Australian authors. It's really nice to support Australian authors, local support.
Yeah.
All things Australia.
All things Australia.
All things Australia.
We're the Author Australia Society.
Anyway, so this month's book, we've got Black River by Matthew Spencer. For those of you that haven't read the book or need a refresher, I'm not going to tell you too much other than it is a thriller. So a change of pace.
A murder mystery.
A murder mystery. And it's following two particular murders. And we want to know whether or not they are linked and the river has something to do with it. It is set in Sydney, but in somewhere different than usual CBD or Bondi or eastern suburbs. It's set in Parramatta, which is a refreshing scene to read a book. And so, yeah, it's thrilling. It's awesome. So we're really excited because we have the amazing author, Matthew, who will be joining us very soon.
Hi, Matt. Welcome to Both Sides Book Club.
Oh, thank you for having me. Great to be here.
We're absolutely thrilled to have you here, and you've had so much success with your novel, so congratulations. It's doing really, really well.
I read it in one sitting.
Oh, wow.
I picked it up and I sat down on a Sunday morning and I sort of surfaced sometime after lunchtime, and
Oh, good on
and
you.
I went, oh yeah, no, this is a goodie. I think this is one that we need to do.
Yeah, and
Oh, lovely.
and amazing too. Like, we love Aussies, and I just think it's so great when you get a really good Aussie book, and we can just all celebrate that. So congratulations! It deserves all the success
Thank
it's
you very
getting.
much. Oh, great.
So, Black River is based loosely on your childhood, and we thought maybe you could start there and explain us how the novel was inspired.
So my father, well, both my parents were teachers, but my father was a teacher at a place called the King School out at North Parramatta, which is a very old and very large school in the size of its campus.
Yeah.
So it's about 350, 400 acres in the middle of metropolitan Sydney at North Parramatta.
That's huge.
And yeah, I grew up, so I was basically born there and grew up there and lived there in sort of school-provided housing with my family until I was 15. And I always thought it was an interesting site, even as a child, geographically. So the book's not really about the institution of the school. It's about the setting's really about the place, the actual empty campus, which has remnant Sydney forest still running through it. It's got a creek, which is a tributary of the Parramatta River. There's 3 tributaries. One of them runs through the school. It's actually the one that got dammed to become Lake Parramatta.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So all those things were there, and the basic idea for the book was that something bad had happened on the empty campus of a boys' boarding school, and a journalist who had lived at the school 30 years ago was sent back by his editor to report on it in the hope that he might have a bit of access that his competitors in the media didn't have.
Yeah.
So that was the setup for the book. And, of course, I was also a journalist for 20 years. So I stole those 2 bits of my life and sort of went from there.
Yeah.
So has there been any drama at that school? Surely. Come on, intel.
Not like that.
No dead bodies.
So, no, I had an idyllic childhood. And, again, it wasn't so much about the school, but back then, sort of, we're talking, I grew up there in the 70s and early 80s. There was a lovely bunch of other teachers who lived there and had children the same age as my sister and myself. So we grew up there together in a wonderful spot. And we used to love it when all the students, many of whom were boarders, or most of them were boarders, went away.
Yeah.
And we just had the campus to ourselves.
Wow.
So it's really about that empty campus.
Yeah.
Because schools are really quite strange when out of term time, aren't they? I remember my mother was also a teacher, and a couple of summers when I was a teenager, she went and taught summer school to foreign students in I mean, nowhere near as grand as your experience, but in a very old public prep school in the south of England. So I know.
That, by the way?
Pardon?
Which city was that in?
I can't. It was in Devon. It was in Devon. I can't actually remember, to be honest, where it was. Now I was about sort of 13 or 14 when I went for the first time, and it's really quite bizarre to sort of roam around the ground of these empty places.
Yeah, well, I think it's one thing to see your teachers out of school. Like, I remember thinking it looked like a dog walking on hind legs, like really like, what is going on? So yeah, I can completely imagine. It's a really good setting, and I think we've seen crime or heard lots of novels and movies that are based in schools, but as you said, they're normally more about what's going on in the school rather than the geography of it. And even more so, it's so great to have, you really depict Sydney. I've also lived in Sydney before, but not in Parramatta on the eastern suburbs.
She's more eastern suburbs girl.
But you depict it so well. Like, to anybody that's not from Sydney or not from Australia, I think you really managed to marry the landscape of Australia really, really well. So congratulations, it's really great.
Yeah, and I was happy actually, because the sort of book starts, I suppose, if you know Sydney, Surrey Hills, Balmain, which is sort of inner west and central and then inner west. And then the book just goes west. Yeah. And I mean, you end up in places like Carlingford and North Parramatta, Carlingford, North Rocks. Now, I'm pretty sure that there's never been a book written about these places.
No.
So I'm glad about that. And the other thing is, I think if you're in, say, another capital in Australia, they've all got rivers and they've all got these big old schools are just something to do with the founding of the colony and all of that. So, Brisbane's got them, Melbourne's got them, Adelaide's got them, Perth's got them, and they've all got rivers. So I'm hoping that readers there won't see it so much as a Sydney novel. And they'll sort of drop into that and understand it pretty well. One
of my favourite lines, I think it's early in the book, and you're just like, the traffic and everything goes west. I love that line, because that's what it is. Like, when you're driving through Sydney, you're either all going east or you're all going, everything just ends up going west, isn't it? It's so easy. So I loved that. It had a nice like pace and feeling. I felt like I was also going west.
Yeah. Do you think it helped you as a debut novelist to have a setting that was familiar? I mean, we've spoken to quite a number of debut novelists over the last couple of years, and it seems to be a common theme is that in order to actually get that first book on the page, if you like, then debut novelists tend to sort of
lend themselves to familiar.
So either a familiar setting or a personal experience that they have had. It was that how it was for you? Was that the catalyst for you actually being able to start writing?
Absolutely, spot on. Yeah. Because, I mean, if you think about it, a crime novel like this, which is sort of plot driven and people move, you've got moving people around rooms, but also around town. And it's exactly as you say. I just thought, if I'm somewhere that I know so well, I don't have to imagine it. Yeah. And so I think that really helps me, and it also gave me confidence that I could actually, in a second book, sort of maybe do it somewhere else where I didn't have to imagine because you learn from the experience. But it was definitely that. And I also think that it helps the reader, because if the writer sort of knows it and is confident where he or she is and what they're doing, then the reader can sort of relax and think, oh, well, he knows or she knows where we're going, so we'll just go with them.
Particularly, I think, when it's so, your book was quite like geography based as well.
Yeah, and that sort of evolved over time. So we had the school, and then the river sort of came into play. There's a lot of drafting of the book. So the book took I mean, between 3 and 4 years. And I was lucky to work with a professional editor almost not from the get-go, but almost from the get-go. So it was sort of draft 2.
Amazing.
About 9 months or a year in, I had an editor on board who I just came in contact with and then really just contracted her to work with because we didn't have a publisher.
Right.
And so she helped me a lot. And these ideas of, say, the river came in a little bit later. They sort of evolved. But I like the way that happened because there was actually this geographical link with the school, which has a creek, which heads to the river. So all that was like, oh, this is actually starting to make sense.
Yes.
Scary.
No, it's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously, you know, the metaphor of the river is fantastic. It's the title, but it snakes through, and it's actually the river that links everything. So that was very clever. Well done.
So on the topic of doing things really well, this is a kind of a curveball thing that the way that
Catie actually likes to throw. She just sort of we start with some questions and Catie just completely disregards them. This is going to sound so weird, but it's to your credit. How Bowman has eczema.
Yeah.
Do you have eczema? You have eczema. Is that right? Is that right? You have it? Yeah, okay. You must have eczema because only person with eczema knows that to use Noviscone cream.
But I'm also married to a skin doctor.
Oh, there you go.
It's almost cured.
Is it? Because normally,
Well, you can't cure it, I think.
Well, you can't, but normally everyone says, oh, hydrocortisone. And as soon as I saw Noviscone, I was like, oh, he knows what's up.
Are you a fellow sufferer?
I'm a fellow sufferer, big time sufferer. Although have managed to get on top of it of late, but you know, stress or the weather or whatever, it flares off. But anyway, thank you for raising awareness for the fellow eczema society and educating everyone with the proper cream.
But those little things are right, actually. And so, I think also as a first-time novelist, you take little things like that and it helps build character because it's true. It's as you say.
Yeah.
Eczema, Noviscone, it's true.
Yeah.
Like if I was trying to describe some other affliction that I didn't have, I'd probably get a little detail wrong.
Yeah.
And then it, you know.
Well, I just loved it, the way that he like itched when he was like thinking or nervous or whatever. I was like, oh, yeah, been there. I know those feelings. So anyways, curveball, but thank you for raising awareness on the eczema.
So why the career change? As you said earlier, you were a very successful journalist with The Australian for 20 odd years. Why did you decide you wanted to write a novel? Why?
I'm not sure I said I was a very successful journalist.
We did.
We did.
I just had enough, really. And broadsheet newspapers, you know, their business model had been eaten by the internet and they're still figuring out what to do about it. So there's a lot of redundancies in that industry. And, I mean, I had a good job at the paper towards the end, but I also had 2 other people's jobs because, you know, they'd left the building.
Yeah.
So it was gruelling, and I'd sort of done 20 years of it, which I felt was enough. And I mean, to be completely honest with you, it's because my wife is a skin doctor that I was able just to say, okay, I'm stepping away. I don't have to keep doing this. It was a lot of weekends, Sundays, because the paper comes out on Mondays, so you work every Sunday.
Yeah, that's
and
hard.
a lot of nights. So the paper used to go to bed at, say, 1 a.m. So you'd clock on at 5 if you're on the backbench, which I did several years of. You'd clock on at 5 and work till 1 in the morning. And we've got 3 kids. And
oh my gosh, that sounds so hard.
So I just got sick of it, and because of my wife, I was able to walk away financially as possible. But then what happened was I wasn't, so that was 2016. In 2017, I wasn't doing particularly much. And the idea wasn't that me at 48 was retiring. It was I was trying to find something else to do. And I was doing a bit of freelance journalism, but my heart wasn't in it. And I'd never thought to write fiction. but I've got a literature degree, and it's always been something I love. I just never thought to write it because I thought to write it you had to have everything, you had to know the whole story. And then I figured out actually all you need is an idea. And I thought, well, I've got an idea. So that was really how it came about.
That's amazing.
It's funny, again, talking to various authors about the way in which they approach writing a novel, because some of them are consummate planners. You know, they have post-its up all over the wall, and they have planned out every plot angle and character in depth before they even start. But others just kind of start with a character pops into their head, or a concept, or a scene, or a concept, and then it's I don't know whether it's more organic, but it seems to be that they find their way through it. I mean, you obviously had a concept, an idea about doing something about the school. Did you have your characters in mind to start with, or how did you translate that? How did it come to fruition, or how did it gel?
Well, I had the idea, the concept, and then within the concept was the character, because the idea was a journalist was sent back. So I had him, but I didn't know too much about him. So really it was, that's how it started. I just had a journalist being sent to a school to report. And to begin with, I wasn't even sure what the crime was, and I certainly didn't know who committed it. And then just went from there. But as I said, it did go through a lot of redrafting, a lot of revising, and we'd spend time on, the journalist, the male journalist, he's looking a bit one-dimensional, so we're trying to flesh out his character. And then we had, there were a lot of even cutting of characters to begin with. So there were too many police, and there were too many journalists, and there were too many people at the school. So we'd sort of, and that was all about just really making it better for the reader.
Do you think your experience as a journalist, because with journalism you obviously have a lot shorter space to make your statement, so do you think your experience of journalism having to get to the point quite quickly helped with your editing and culling back and stripping back?
I think the journalism helped me with research. So I spoke to a lot of police and a lot of forensic doctors, and so just the ability to interview helped me. And I'm not sure about the writing. And when I was editing myself, it helped. But when I was being edited by an actual fiction editor, one, she was doing it and she wasn't a journalist, but also it's a completely different skill. So she was just tearing the whole thing apart and saying, okay, so they call it structural editing. You know, there's big problems in the structure. And me as a journalism editor, I could never do that.
Wow.
It takes a lot of, it's a real skill to be able to do that.
So maybe we can talk a little bit more into the characters and the relationship between the police officers, because it's the way you've put it together. It's often we see there being lots of rivalry in the police force, or misogyny, or there's often like lots of tension between police officers when we're reading in fiction, and the way there seemed to be so much mutual respect for each other. And I just wanted to find out why you chose to write the characters that way, and why it was important that they work together well.
I think the seed of that, so there's a male detective chief inspector of homicide, so he's the sort of top dog. He wouldn't be running New South Wales homicide, but he'd have a boss, but he'd be very high up, and he's running this investigation. And then under him he has a detective sergeant who's still quite a high-ranking officer. But so within the task force there might be 20 detectives. She's still high-ranking, but she's below her boss. The seed for that relationship was actually speaking to a male detective chief inspector of New South Wales homicide. And I said to him, okay, this is what you're dealing with. this is the crime, the plot. How would you go about it? Or what would you be doing?
Wow.
And he didn't give away sort of actual operational.
Yeah, of course.
Things. But he did talk a lot about relationships, and he said he wouldn't want 15 people who could kick in a door. What he'd be looking for is intelligence, also the ability to work hard, because, you know, you go into these things and it could run for, I don't know. I mean, my book probably unfolds over 10 days, maybe, you know, there's a little gap where nothing happens, so maybe 3 weeks.
But these things can go on for months and months and years.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and also he did say gender, if you get a gender balance, it's important, because he'd say if I had a good female officer working with me, she's going to interview people in a different way than I do.
Wow, yeah.
She's going to hear things and see things in a different way. So that was the seed for the relationship. And then, I don't know, it just came out that's how it then evolved, that relationship. But several people have picked up on it, so I'm glad it's working in that way.
Yeah, because I think the normal, if you like, the stereotypical police procedural, then usually the leading detective has a fatal flaw. You know, they are a deeply flawed human being, and yet they are brilliant, and they manage to work it out. So, I mean, what I really liked was that we got to know enough about the characters, but not everything.
Yeah.
So there were all kinds of questions coming up in your head as you're reading it. You go, okay, we're getting to know this person, but we don't really know them, and so we don't really know what kind of person they are, or what they like, or what they don't like, which I feel was actually far more realistic, because we do come across people professionally in certain circumstances, and they seem like interesting people, but you actually know very little about them. So I think you did that really, really beautifully to tell us enough about them to get us really interested and invested in them, but not for them to be an open book.
Yeah, and I think the other point I'd make on that is that, so if you look at the Riley character, the detective sergeant, I mean, she's in a very intense period of her life in the book.
Yeah.
You know, this is probably the biggest case she's ever run. They're worrying that someone's killed 2 people, might have killed a third, and is coming back to kill a 4th if they don't catch him. And it's 10 days of her sort of hard charging, you know. So you do go to her house, but you don't really find out what's the relationship with her mother. You don't know. There's the idea that she's got parents and siblings.
Or stereotypically who she's sleeping with, which is generally what happens.
And she doesn't have time for any of that.
Yeah.
So that was the other point that, which was a bit of the reason why I wrote it like that.
Yeah, well, it's to your credit. It's really refreshing to read that, and like Mum said, it's accurate in the sense that you do build. Or for example, for myself, I work in film and photography stuff. So when I'm working on a film set, you get to know everybody intimately for that role, and then you spend an intense. So if we're doing an ad or a commercial, you're working intensely with them for 3 or 4 days in a professional sense, and then all of a sudden, boom, gone. Onto the next. Yeah. And it's the same thing. You get to know them, you have the nuances, and you feel like you know them, but I couldn't tell you what their grandma does or their partner does or whatever, but I might know the way that they scratch their arm. So in a way, it was really refreshing. It was lovely. I scratched my arm. That she starts scratching your arm. Bloody hell.
I've got some Novasol here.
Oh, do you? Do you want to just give me a couple?
That's right. And you also would form, like Bowman and Riley have formed opinions of each other's character and whether they can trust each other. And that sort of stuff is happening just on a level where you're not probably even sure that you're doing it, but you think actually, you know, she was a nice person and all that sort of thing hopefully is coming through as well about the characters.
Oh, absolutely. So talking about workplace, maybe we can talk a little bit about Adam Bowman. Oh, sorry.
Bowman.
I find that actually challenging to say. Adam Bowman.
Adam Bowman.
I think it's because it's a D and a B. You know, like Adam Bowman. It's like a dibber. Can you stop laughing? Could you please tell us a little bit about how accurate his workplace is and if you maybe your career inspired a little bit into some of his characters traits?
Yeah. I think it's fair. The newsroom's fairly accurate because I've worked in one for so long. I know how it is. But I did take liberties. So Bowman has an editor above him. Now, in a real newsroom, a fellow like Bowman, a reporter like Bowman, would have above him a Sydney or a Brisbane chief of staff, depending on the city, then a national chief of staff, then an editor who wouldn't have much to do with him.
Okay.
And then above that, an editor-in-chief who'd have very little to do with him. So I sort of crunched all those four figures into one because, again, the reader doesn't really care about all that. And you just need... So that editor character is 5 people. Bowman himself, look, I did take facets of my career. The newspaper I was at, the Australian, back in the day, was quite hierarchical. So, you know, you could be a lowly reporter and the sort of, you know, federal political reporter wouldn't really sort of give you the time of day. It's all, as you know, some of that is stereotype and it depends on personalities. But, no, it was a hierarchical place. And just also, I suppose, people do get shunted onto sort of late shifts and that sort of thing. And, you know, a lot of people have left the industry, but someone like Bowman might actually still be there. He wouldn't be paid much money and he'd serve a purpose in that he'd do the crappy
jobs, crappy
hours
shifts,
and do the crappy jobs.
Yeah.
So, yeah, in that regard, it's, I think, fairly accurate. The relationship with the police, so the police pull him, they find him and then pull him in up to a point into their investigation and start to, so they sort of feed off each other. But they know, the journalist and the cops know they're using each other. So there's no real subterfuge. They know the score. That sort of thing would happen, but whether it would happen to this extent, I'm not sure. But maybe on a really big story like this, it might. The idea for that really came from the first Iraq War, where the US forces were embedding journos into their sort of battalions and things. So that was more the idea of the relationship.
Wow. And I suppose my kind of like concluding question is, without any spoilers, but seeing as you, so the idea came to you geographically and you had Adam Bowman as your main character, without giving any spoilers, when did the killer come to mind in your mind?
So in my first draft, so the book's about, let's say, 75,000 words long. At 30,000 words of my first draft,
wow, yeah,
I didn't know who.
You didn't know who.
I love that.
But then also, not to give away any spoilers, there are 2 crimes that the police are looking at, and the book's really about are they linked?
Yeah.
Correct.
So I suppose halfway through the writing process, let's say, 2 years in and 8 drafts, one of the crimes had been solved and the second crime had been left open and it hadn't been solved.
Oh, okay.
And I showed it to a friend of mine who's an editor at The Australian and a big reader in the genre. And he rang me up and said, I think we need to go and have a chat about this. Meet me at the Aurora, which is this horrible bar. So I thought, this doesn't sound good.
Yeah.
And he said, no, everything's got to be solved. You have to wind everything up. And I'm like, no, that's the sequel, you idiot.
Yeah.
It's like, no, it has to be solved. Because otherwise the reader's going to really hate you.
Yeah. No, I like that we found out. I do like that. And I like who it was too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the interesting thing about all of that was he didn't suggest how I might go about it. He just said it had to happen. So then here I am, and I've got this book, and then it's like, oh, well, the person who did it's sitting there.
Yeah.
That he or she was already in the narrative.
Has to be. Yes.
And that was pretty weird, but it actually, I think it worked.
No, it did. Absolutely. To your credit.
Yes, the shades of Agatha Christie, you know. When Hercule Poirot, you know, sits everybody down in the room and says the killer is one of you.
Yeah. So
actually,
anyway,
I just want to ask you quickly about Dr. Farquhar and because again, I actually really liked because that we got the psychology of the killer, or the profiling and what his likely motivations and methods would be through this third person, Dr. Farquhar, who's the forensic psychiatrist consulting with the police, rather than, you know, having the killer actually as a character all the way through, which is a quite common trope.
Yeah.
So how did you come up with that?
So I actually had two doctors in the book quite early. I had a forensic pathologist and a forensic psychiatrist. They just happened to be there, was how I wrote it. And then an editor, or actually a publisher, a friend who wasn't looking to publish it but agreed to read it for me early on, said, nah, just have one. One doctor, and the information at, say, the autopsy can be delivered in a different way. You don't have to introduce a new person.
Character.
And in the end, so you saw how that was done. So then I was left with this forensic psychiatrist, and he was informed by two things. One, I talked extensively with a forensic psychiatrist in Sydney. So, and we had lots of chats. And again, it would be, you know, we're looking at this person, what would their psychology be? So I got a lot of info through that. And I'm quite happy to say, actually, he just read the book, because I thought, you know, when he reads it, it's going to be, oh, my God. And he liked it.
Yay!
Good. The forensic pathologist...
Surprise. Excuse me. You need to give yourself a bit more credit. You have had so much success with this novel. Excuse me.
Say, like a police detective reading it is a bit different from you or me reading it.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
The forensic pathologist has read it twice.
Oh! No, and was it? And was he? Did he feel like you nailed it?
Well, I think so. He thoroughly enjoyed it. There were probably small issues with procedure that are just wrong, but he just says you just brush over that. It doesn't matter. The main thing is it's the reader. You really want to be pleasing the reader and not, you know, anything else. So, but the other thing, going back to the psychiatrist and the psychology of the people involved, was I did a fair bit of reading of non-fiction crime, specifically around the Golden State Killer.
I know.
So there's 3 or 4 books, or 2 books on him that I read, which really helped me. And that's the idea of how someone might escalate from sort of burglary to rape to murder, which is what he did in real life in California. So I read those books, and then books like Mindhunter. And so I stole sort of things from that as well.
Yeah, there's a fantastic true crime podcast actually on the Golden State Killer, and he's just absolutely fascinating that that after 30 odd years, they catch him through a DNA.
Oh, that's the one. That's the one you're telling me about.
D'Angelo, his name, wasn't it?
D'Angelo in California. And it's it's a horrible story.
Horrible story.
It's a great story at the moment, in a way, because they did get him, I think, in 2016. And he'd been active since maybe the late 60s. And they didn't know. So, as I said, he started off breaking in and ransacking houses, and I'm guessing that they might have had 100 ransackings in particular place in Northern California. And then they started to get these rapes, and they had sort of 60 rapes, and they still didn't get him. And then they had these murders. And it was only later when DNA came along that someone sort of put everything, because they had sort of old rape kits and things like this and stuff from the murder, and even from the ransackings, fingerprints or whatever, or not fingerprints, but they must have had DNA from there as well. And it was only then that they realised this was the same guy.
Yeah, and he was 70 by this stage. Yeah.
Yeah,
oh my God.
and then they got him.
Yeah.
But the great bit about it is it sort of hasn't resonated globally like, I don't know, Son of Sam or something, or the Zodiac Killer. For some reason, I don't know why. But
surely they'll make a series about it or something.
Yeah, and it has given great closure, I think, to the victims, especially
it would have.
the rape victims. Finally, they got this bastard, and they can look him in the eye.
Yeah.
So that's the great thing about it.
Yeah, and he was a policeman.
Yeah,
I mean,
I know.
originally.
Yeah,
I mean, he was a...
It's so wild. It's, Blah, blah, blah.
Well, that's the thing about my book. You sort of think, oh, this is sort of fiction, but actually, it's all happened.
Yeah.
It's what Sarah says about his books. It's all happened.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
But,
well, anyway, enough about raping.
So,
what's next?
What's next? What are you doing? Have you already written another book, or are you in the process, or what's happening?
I'm about halfway through book 2.
Oh my gosh, congratulations.
Yeah, well, this one's been done for a year or so. That's
But
just
still,
it takes ages, the
halfway
last
through.
bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that, it's not a sequel, but it's sort of a series. So it takes Riley and Patel are the main characters.
Oh, cool. They're all my favourite.
It's her point of view. It's told through Riley's point of view. It doesn't shift. This one shifts in point of view.
Yeah.
At this stage, it hasn't shifted. Bowman hasn't appeared, but is occasionally thought about by Riley. And, so Farquhar, I think, is about to turn up because Riley's looking at a certain person and would like to get Farquhar's thoughts on this person. And O'Neill is busy elsewhere.
Right.
So, so I'm not sure Bowman could turn up, but I also, there'll be, I think, a book 3, and that might bring us back to Bowman if he doesn't appear in this one.
Oh, I'm excited.
You can go on to be Michael Connolly.
Yeah.
You know, we can. You can actually have a whole series of books with different Mickey Haller and Bosch
and somebody else,
you know,
punched in there.
and Renee. What's the name? The Ballard. Yeah.
Michael probably got started a bit younger than I have, but anyway.
Hey, you just got to make up for lost time.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and once again, congratulations on the success. It has been an absolute delight to chat to you and to unpack it a bit more.
Thanks for having me. It was really lovely.
Our pleasure.
And thank you once again for all the fellow eczema people.
Keep at it with the Nova side.
We will.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Matt. Bye. Thanks, Matthew. That was so interesting talking to you. And guys, if you haven't read the book, go buy it because you're going to love it.
Yeah, it's so great to read a thriller, and particularly one that's more based on geography. It was a really refreshing, different take.
It was, and the way Matthew handles his crimes, again, was slightly different. So, it's a goodie.
And it was awesome to unpack it. So thank you so much, Matthew. It was an absolute pleasure. So moving on, what is our next book for next month?
Okay, so...
July.
I know, can you believe it?
Halfway through.
Halfway through the year. Okay, so our next book is called Family of Liars by E. Lockhart. Now, this is a bit of an interesting one. It's actually a young adult novel. Doesn't look like one, doesn't read like one, but it is. And it's a sequel to a book that was published a few years ago called We Were Liars. Now, the reason the author's actually written a sequel is because the first book has become a massive BookTok sensation. So
is that BookTok?
BookTok.
So for those that don't know, educate yourselves, get on TikTok and look up Book Talk.
Yeah, but the book is a great read, set in the States. It's a family saga of the Sinclair family and their holiday island, and you're going to love it.
Amazing. So thank you so much, guys. We cannot wait to chat to you next month.
We hope you enjoyed watching this episode.
If you did, please leave us a comment below. We'll see you soon.